If you listen to any quirky space stories, you've probably heard about Biosphere 2, which was this old experiment that was done in the late 80s, early 90s, where they tried to put a bunch of people inside of this dome and seal them off and say, survive. It was a pretty crazy experiment, so let's get into the details of how crazy it actually was. So this project was first kind of conceived and started in the early 80s, like 1984, I think. The two lead guys who are kind of heading up this project are, the first guy's name is John P. Allen, who is kind of like the architect, overseer, kind of brainstorming guru who's doing all of like the heavy lifting. And then the financing person is a guy by the name of Ed Bass, who is like an oil billionaire tycoon who had a lot of money and was very philanthropic and who was very concerned about the environment. He ended up putting in around 150 million of his own money, which at the time in the early 80s was a lot more then than it is now. And then after the project, so there's like two separate instances where he had to put in a healthy chunk of change. There's the first experiment, and then the second one, which ended up costing an additional like $50 million. So he puts in like all told around $200 million. Hefty chunk of change. So these two guys first met each other and got together at something called Synergy Ranch, which I'm pretty sure was founded by this guy, John P. Allen. Basically, this ranch is a collective of a bunch of different people who want to like make the planet better, and they're ecologists, they're conservationists. They really want to like help the planet and be like self-sustaining, so they're not like being a burden on the planet. So the people at this ranch are all kind of running this experiment and being like the brains and the muscle and like the actual energy behind making this thing happen. So originally this experiment was meant to be like a simulation for how we would go and colonize other planets. It was meant to be like, especially for Mars, because I think Mars was big back in the day about people thinking about where we would go, like even more so than it is now. So the people are all thinking, eventually we're going to colonize these other worlds. We need to know what life is like. How are we going to survive as humans on these other planets? So they think, well, maybe what we can do is we can build like a giant contained ecosystem, like this giant system that is self-contained and doesn't have to interact with the outside environment at all. And then if we build that, we should be able to recreate that on another planet and still live. So they go to Arizona and they start construction on this massive dome. It's called a dome. People call it a dome. There is only like one really dome-like structure on it. It's like very geodesic, and there's a pyramid in there, and there's a tower, and I think there's like a ball at the top of the tower. So this project is massive, and like I said before, it cost $150 million, and not for no reason, because there's a lot of stuff going into this project. There are 5 different ecosystems that are all fit into this massive thing. I think it's like the whole facility is over 3 acres. I think it's like 3.14 acres in size. Like just the land mass is covered, like all of the stuff inside of the dome is 3 acres worth of square footage. So you've got a bunch of different habitats and ecosystems in there. You've got a rainforest, you've got an ocean, you've got a savanna, a marshland, a forest / agriculture area. And then you've got the human habitat, which is like where the kitchen and the beds and like workshops and laboratories and that kind of thing are all in the human habitat. So the people at Synergy Ranch actually had some experience doing this kind of thing before. They had actually been, it's kind of a crazy story. These were some doer people. There was one source I read that said that they were like a group of theater people. It was just like a wandering theater troupe who didn't really know what they were doing. But I think honestly that article that I read that talked about that kind of felt like he was just trying to discredit them. So I don't know how accurate that is. Anyway, so they had these people who got together and decided that they wanted to sail around the world. And they're like, well, if we're going to sail around the world, we need a boat. And they're like, well, why don't we just make one ourselves? So this young kid who, I don't know what his background was, but he's like, I've never built a boat before, but how hard could it be? So they end up building this like very large yacht. It's like 24 feet or like 32 feet, or like, it's a big old boat. And they spend like a year on this boat traveling all around the world, learning about different ecosystems and how things work. But they built it themselves with no experience prior, and it lasted for a year. So, I mean, it worked pretty well. Anyway, so these people are now building this dome, and there's a lot of engineering that goes into this dome, like a crap ton. They've got these 2 giant iron lungs that are like off site. They're not a part of the actual dome itself, but they're off to the side, and they're big. And there's like this giant membrane inside of these domes that's like 400 tons or something, very heavy, and it's controlled by the air pressure inside of the actual facility, because in Arizona, the temperature is known to fluctuate. So if the temperature is fluctuating in the Arizona heat, the air inside of the dome, because it's all self-contained and it's sealed off like 100%, 99.9% from the outside world, that air inside is still getting warmer and hotter as the temperature changes. So as the air gets warmer, it expands, and as the air gets colder at night, it contracts. So if you don't have some way to regulate that air changing inside the dome, you're going to get some windows that like either break or implode. Not good. So they came up with these iron lung things that when the air pressure inside changes, like if it gets hotter outside, the lungs will go up, and as the air pressure changes, they'll raise up the membranes inside of the lungs. As the air temperature cools and the air pressure goes down, the lungs will lower as well. So it's really pretty cool. And they also had some giant generators off-site that are powering things, which I'm not sure exactly how this was meant to be like replicated on Mars. It's like a lot of stuff that is being built in this dome, and I really am not sure how they were planning to replicate this on Mars, because it took them a couple years to even just build it. So maybe they were planning to like get the initial testing thing out of the way first, and then later on they could figure that stuff out. Anyways, so they've got another kind of area that I think they call it like a second habitat, or like a separate habitat, but it's really just a space underneath the dome where all of the pipes are running and all of the electrical lines are running and all of these different things that you need to keep the dome running, because they've got like an ocean tank that holds like 100,000 gallons of water, and that needs to be circulated. And there's also like freshwater streams where the fish are swimming, and those also need to be circulated, and air scrubbers and a bunch of different things that all need to function properly. So you've got this space underneath the dome that is like kind of got pipes and tunnels and access hatches, and all this stuff is controlling everything above ground. So now that they've got all this stuff built, they say, well, we need to explore, and we need to actually send some people in there to be the guinea pigs to see how this thing is actually going to work for humans, because that's why we built it. So they get these 8 different people. I think they're called biospherians or bionauts maybe. And these 8 different people, there's 4 men and 4 women, and all of them have a very specific thing that they are like trained to do as they go in. There's a person who's in charge of agriculture. There's a medic / doctor person who maybe I'll talk about him in a second. There is a person who's in charge of some other stuff. So there's 8 different people, and they all go in pretty optimistically thinking, this is great. We're going to do this. It'll be hard work, but we'll get it done. It's a little bit confusing at what point the plant levels start. Like, did they grow the plants beforehand, or are the plants all like young plants and they're having to take care of them? I'm not sure exactly. Unclear. So these bionauts go in to this closed system, and it is pretty much like completely closed. There's no air getting in or out. There's no water going in or out. There's no food going in or out. Pretty much the only thing that's coming in is sunlight, which is important. I think one source said that there is like less than 10% oxygen loss over the course of 3 years, which is pretty crazy, because they also said that NASA loses like 2% of their oxygen a day when their spaceships are going up into orbit and whatnot. So 10% over the course of 3 years or 2 years. It's a 2-year trip. 10% over the course of 2 years is pretty good. So they're in this habitat dome bubble thing, and they are completely cut off from the world. They're doing their thing. They're growing crops, they're harvesting crops, they're raising livestock and wild pigs and that kind of thing, and they are taking care of business. But right off the get-go, things start going downhill. The oxygen levels inside of the dome start going down, which is bad. And they don't find out until much later that there was a couple different factors which caused the oxygen to go down. Number one was the soil. They weren't counting on the microbes in the soil eating up the oxygen and producing carbon dioxide. And there was a lot of soil because they have a lot of plants and trees and things growing. So all of that soil is putting off excess carbon dioxide, which is causing the oxygen levels to go down. And another thing is that the concrete inside of the walls is eating up that carbon dioxide, which might sound good initially because it's like, oh, we want oxygen, we don't want carbon dioxide because we need oxygen to breathe. So if the concrete eats up the carbon dioxide, that's good for us, right? No, wrong, because the plants also need carbon dioxide to put off oxygen. So if all of the carbon dioxide is getting eaten up, then the plants don't have anything to split. There's no carbon, no 2 oxygens in 1 carbon element to split in half and get more oxygen from, so the plants can't do their job, which is bad. So oxygen levels are going down. And then also another problem they run into right off the bat is the woman who is in charge of agriculture gets her finger caught in a threshing machine, and the tip gets whoosh, chopped right off. And so the medic who is there tries to reattach her finger. It's a no-go. He says, you need medical attention. We can't give it to you here in the dome, so we're going to send you out. So they send her out. So she gets her finger reattached. She's out for like a day or 2. Can't remember exactly. And then she comes back in. But mysteriously, she brings back in 2 duffel bags, and these duffel bags are controversial because a lot of people are thinking, hey, what the heck, man? You guys are supposed to be a closed system. Why are you bringing in outside materials? Contents of the duffel bags are super unclear. Some people are like, it was microchips and oxygen, and other people are like, it was plans for the rainforest to like seed things, and unclear. But she brings stuff in, and the media hears about this. Unclear why the media is so concerned about this project anyways. It's like a big deal. Apparently the media was like all over this, and the story gets out, and it's like everybody's going crazy that it's like, oh, it's just a big joke. They're just joking around. Like it's humiliating. They're trying to be scientists, but they're just a group of theater people, or they're just a bunch of people from a hippie ranch. Anyway, so the media is all over this, and they're saying, you guys messed up. The integrity of the project is broken. How can you say you're a real scientist when you're just bringing things in willy-nilly? Anyway, so it's a big deal, controversial. So people hear about this story in the media, and then people start to come and like gawk at them. And I think somebody said there's like a couple million people that end up coming to look at these bionauts in their spheres, because they have the glass windows. It's all made out of glass, so people can just come right up to the glass and look at the people inside, because they need the sunlight to come in through the glass. But that means that people can just walk up right out to the outside. So there's a bunch of people who come. It almost turns into like a tourist attraction, people just coming to look at them. So they're experiencing problems. They are having some good things happen though. Like a lot of things are happening that are good. They are harvesting crops, like the crops are actually growing. They're getting their food. They are like sustaining themselves. They do end up going the full 2 years, which a lot of people, they make it sound like they had to cut the project short and cancel it. But no, honestly, they lasted 2 years inside of this dome. And there's a little bit of help that gets given to them from the outside, but overall, I mean, it's pretty impressive that they were in there for 2 years. So they have like all of the regular crops that you might expect: wheat, corn, barley, sweet potatoes, carrots, fruits and veggies. They have some fish that they're growing, I think tilapia, and they have cows and chickens and that kind of stuff to sustain themselves. But problem is that there are unexpected things still happening with the plants. They had like very detailed notes on what to bring in. There's like a lot of planning and forethought that went into this project. And so they have a bunch of species that they had intended to put into the rainforest and in with the plants to preserve the ecosystems, because these ecosystems are complicated, right? So they have all these plants and animals that they put in on purpose. But the problem is that not all of the plants and animals that they put in on purpose survive. So some of them die off, and some of them do really well, maybe a little bit too well. Things like ants and cockroaches and other little insects start taking over and killing off other things. There's these plants called the morning glories, which is like a vine, and they end up being like super prolific, and they start taking over huge swaths of the rainforest. And this crew has to spend a lot of their time and energy ripping down the morning glories so they don't just kill off all of the other plants. As far as like meat goes, sounds like they didn't have enough like actual livestock it's like they don't have enough time for the livestock to reproduce so that they could get like a large amount of meat. So I think each of the 8 people gets allotted like a 1/4 pound of meat a week, which is not very much. It's like a hamburger patty of meat a week. The crew has to eat a lot of carrots and potatoes because those are the things that grow the most quickly. And a lot of sources say this is that if you eat a lot of carrots and potatoes, or sweet potatoes maybe, there's a lot of like keratin in those vegetables that is orange, and if you eat too much of it, it will turn your skin orange. But there's a lot of footage of this experiment, and none of them do I see any orange skinned people. So I'm a little bit skeptical about that anecdote, but it turns up in a lot of sources. So because they are sustaining themselves, but they're not sustaining themselves as well as they would like. There's coffee plants that are producing enough for each person to get 1 cup of coffee a week, which is a bummer. I would have a very hard time with that. And so they start to lose a lot of weight after like a year. So they are losing weight steadily for like 10 months, a year, a very good chunk of time. They're losing weight steadily until they're all like pretty thin looking. But there's their medic on site who is in the dome with them. And so apparently this guy had done a lot of studies on mice and like calorie intakes, and is a big advocate of like low calorie diets, where he really believes that the key to a healthy lifestyle is like low calories and not a lot of actual food. People can survive on a lot less food than you would think. And so he's like, you know what, you guys, you're all super healthy. Like you lost 25 pounds each of you, but you're still super healthy. So no big deal. And then in the second year, they do actually start to gain a bit of their weight back, maybe because they start being better at agriculture, farming. I'm not sure exactly. Another big thing that goes wrong in the first experiment is that the people start to get into a bit of a tiff with each other. So because that woman came in initially from the first little bit of the experiment with the 2 duffel bags, there's kind of like this pressure on them to either maintain the integrity of the experiment and don't get any help from the outside world, or to bring in some outside help and like actually continue, make it the full 2 years and see how it goes. And so there's 4 people on one side that really want to maintain the integrity and accept no help from the outside, and there's 4 people on the other side who are like, no, we need help, we need oxygen, like it feels like all of us are swimming underwater because we aren't getting enough oxygen. So there's a pretty big rift between the 2 groups, and nobody ever ends up getting into fights, or no like hands are ever thrown. But I think one source said that some people got spit on, and there was like, they would not talk to each other for like months at a time, it sounds like, where they were just like going about their lives in this 3-acre square thing where they're locked in there together and they're just like not talking to each other or acknowledging each other, which sounds like a bummer. So eventually oxygen does get pumped in. I think there's like a giant tanker of oxygen that gets brought up in like the 16th month, I want to say. So this is not like right at the beginning. This is after over a year they've been in there, and then oxygen gets brought in and pumped in, which I feel like kudos to them. I mean, they did pretty well, better than I could have done. So after this first experiment ends, everybody inside, I feel like, is pretty happy with the results, because I mean, it's like an experiment. Some things went wrong, but what experiment doesn't have a problem where it's like everything goes perfectly right? So, and they also are gaining a ton of information about like closed ecosystems, because Biosphere 2 is meant to simulate Earth as much as possible, and it is the largest, I think to my knowledge, it's still the largest closed ecosystem of like Earth that we have, which is the reason it's called Biosphere 2, because the original Biosphere 1 is the Earth, which is a little bit confusing. I don't know why they didn't think that through very well, but so they're still doing experiments on Biosphere 2. It's still like a project that's up and running, and they use each of the ecosystems to run closed experiments on like large ecosystems. Like there's one in the ocean that they're doing where they were able to discover that if you put a concentration of carbon dioxide into the air and the ocean will start to absorb that carbon dioxide, and it will start to acidify the ocean water or something like that. It's called like ocean acidification or something like that. I'm not sure. Anyways, it's pretty cool. It's very useful large scale space to have so that you can run experiments. Not by any means a trivial thing. And a lot of people make it out to be like, oh, they messed up. They didn't do, it was a failure. No, not a failure. It worked out pretty well, honestly. So after the first experiment, they kind of regroup. I think the first experiment ends in 93. They regroup after a while, and then they send, a couple years later, I think it's like early 2000s, they send another group in to run the experiment. But the first experiment was a little bit bumpy, agreed. But the second experiment was pretty much a total failure, because largely in part due to the outside administration who is running things. The sources are like very scattered about the second experiment. Everybody kind of just glosses over what happens with the second experiment. So there's 8 more people, I believe, that go in the second time around, and they're only in there for a short period of time until things start to fall apart on the outside. Once again, during the first experiment, when people were disagreeing about what they should do on the inside, and there was like that big schism, there was also a rift in the outside administration, but they kind of kept it together a little bit better. And the second experiment, they do not keep it together, and everything falls apart. To compound matters and make things worse, there's 2 people from the first experiment, which like always completely unexplained why they do this, but they come and they break some windows, which is a problem when you have a closed ecosystem, and they open some emergency doors, which also a problem, and they let in a bunch of air, and they kind of throw things for a large loop, because nobody was expecting these 2 people from the first experiment to come in and mess things up. It's like super unclear. They cite their reasons for why they did this as that they believed that the people inside were in danger. Yeah, I don't know. So that's a big problem. So after that, all of the people from the first administration are like let go and fired, and they bring in like whole new staff. All the locks get changed, all the passwords get changed. Everything is like redone. And then the guy who oversees the administration is also changed in Steve Bannon, which I don't know why. I don't know anything about this guy, but every video or like source I mentioned who talks about this guy is like, oh, he's a big deal. He was with Trump and he is a businessman. I don't know. Anyway, so he comes in, and it's really kind of unclear why he's running this scientific experiment. Some people said that he was wanting to like change the course of the experiment and like start doing mineral research or something. Unclear. So the whole thing kind of goes up in flames. They have to end it early. One of the women who's inside gets called away on a family emergency, and then her husband is like, well, I also have a family emergency, and so he leaves too. So it's kind of just a large disaster. And then because there was like this large problem with the administration, the actual data and scientific findings that they had gathered while they were doing this experiment gets put under like lock and key because there's a big legal battle and it's just this huge mess. After that, they decided not to try any other experiments. Ed Bass, I guess, has decided he's going to move on to other things and decides to sell the land, which is kind of confusing what happens to the land. It first gets sold to a university, and then the university puts up half the land for auction so that people can build like luxury hotels on there. But then that university is like, JK, we're going to give it to Arizona University. So currently the property is being held by Arizona University. They're the ones who are running experiments on it at the moment. But yeah, that's kind of the whole story in a nutshell. I know that was pretty rushed and a little crazy, but thanks for hanging in there. If you have made it thus far and you want to hear more content like this, go ahead and subscribe or leave a comment or leave a like. Any one of them is fine with me. I'm glad we did this, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.